Hi and welcome to another BREWHA video. In this video we'll be looking at the BREWHA Small BIAC. It's a newly released version of the BIAC, and we're just going to be looking at how to brew with it and going through the steps in the process of making an American blonde ale. So what we've done today is we've taken cold water out of the tap. We like to use cold water because hot water can sometimes bring flavor. If the hot water heater is not hasn't been flushed out, it can contribute flavor to the beer. So we use cold water, it's the freshest. And we use the ETC to warm up the water to our strike temperature. When we program the ETC, we can then walk away and go do errands or whatever we need to do in the time that it takes to bring your cold water from the 40 or 50 Fahrenheit, 5 or 10 degrees Celsius up to your strike temperature. Our strike temperature today is going to be 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to be mashing at 152. We picked up our grain from the local brew shop yesterday, and we had it in the fridge overnight. So we've raised the strike temperature just a little bit to compensate for that. So we've got, for this batch that we're brewing today of American Blonde, we've got 9.5 pounds of, let me just check the recipe here, 9 pounds of organic two-row from the US organic two-row. We've got 8 ounces of Crystal 15 that we're putting in, and we're going to be using 1.25 ounces of Willamette hops. They have an alpha acid. These ones I think was about 7%. It's going to be a little bit high on the bitterness side. I personally like my blondes to be, my American blondes blonde ale, to be a little bit more bitter, as it just sort of brings out the crispness and freshness of that style of ale. So it's on the moderate to kind of high moderate side that is typical for that beer. And we're using a Yeast 1056 yeast we're going to be pitching a little bit later. This beer recipe is built on a brew your own American Blonde that we saw, and have adapted it slightly, but it's pretty much the same beer. So we're going to get to it. We're going to add our grist, and we've got 22 liters of water. That's what we've put into the 3-in-1, and then we've inserted our mash colander into it. Another thing that we've done is we have put 3 liters of water. That is the size of the jacket on the 27-liter 3-in-1, and it is warming up the heating element as it heats up the water inside the 3-in-1, is also heating the water up in the jacket, and we're going to be using that for sparge a little later in the video. We haven't added any additional minerals to the water. Here in Vancouver, we have a fairly nice water profile for this style of beer, so we don't need to modify it at all. The 3-in-1 comes standard without a chugger pump assembly. It can be purchased separately. We're not going to be using it today. The reason we don't include it with the small BIAC package is that for this volume of wort, it's fairly easy to voil off just by using a measuring cup, transferring wort out of the bottom and putting it back on the top at the end. For the larger volume, for the 20-gallon BIAC or the 55-gallon, it's a lot of liquid that needs to be transported out, and so the pump comes standard with it. Just going to stir it, break any dough balls up. Going to lock those wheels. Okay, so we have stirred the mash. We've adjusted the ETC to 152 Fahrenheit, which is our mashing temperature. The element is going to come on if ever the temperature in the water surrounding the mash colander drops to 151. It's going to warm it back up to 152. So it's going to keep it at 152 Fahrenheit for the duration of the mash, which is 1 hour. So we're going to put the lid on, and we're going to stir it probably about midway through, and then we'll come back in about an hour. Just want to look quickly at the setup of the BREWHA BIAC. So down here at the bottom we have a ball valve. That's the bottom of the conical, and that is used for removing the grain that has settled through the mash colander and settled down to the bottom of the conical. We'll be pulling that out and putting it back up on top of the colander as soon as we raise the colander out of the 3-in-1. We've got a port here at the front. This is the racking port. That valve is going to stay closed. We've got a ball valve on the far side, the lower portion of the jacket, because we're holding water inside the jacket right now. We're going to be pulling that water out and putting it up into the top of the colander once it is raised out of the 3-in-1 in order to sparge the grain and rinse some of the last bit of sugar off of the grain. So here at the top is the port that is for the top of the jacket. It's just open right now, but there's water inside the jacket. Down here we have the 1500 watt heating element, and it is plugged into the receptacle portion, the female plug end of the ETC, and then the male plug of the ETC goes into the wall. So power comes from the wall into the ETC, and whenever the temperature, the ETC senses the temperature and it knows that it needs to turn on. If the temperature is dropping, it then opens up and sends the power through to the element, which then starts warming it back up again. If you need to ensure that the temperature is distributed evenly throughout the mash colander down through the jacket, especially at the beginning of your mash, what you're going to need to do is to pull the wort out of the bottom of the conical and transfer the wort back up into the top colander in order to move the wort through. If you purchase the chugger pump assembly, then this will obviously be done for you automatically. You just connect the pump to the bottom port, and the pump then pushes the wort back up into the top of the colander and is constantly circulating. If you're going to be doing step mashing, then a pump is going to be necessary because, or it's going to be very helpful, because at several points throughout the mash period you're going to want to be raising the temperature of the entire vessel, the colander, and the 3-in-1. And the quickest and easiest way to do that thoroughly all through the grain bed is to be circulating your wort constantly. So right now we're just going to use a measuring cup. We've got a single step mash, and so the temperature is constant throughout. We're just going to be draining a bit of wort out the bottom port here, and we're going to be putting it back up top. The benefit of this also is that any grain that has settled through the colander and into the bottom of the conical can be removed and put back up into the top. Okay, so we've reached the end of the mash period, and we're going to lift the mash colander out. We're going to rest it on the lower handles and allow all the wort to drain into the boil kettle. As soon as we've raised it, we're going to be vorlofing by transferring wort out the bottom of the 3-in-1 and putting it back into the top of the colander. And this is going to help to clarify the beer because a filter bed has formed inside the mash colander through the circulations that we did earlier. And we're going to be removing the sediment that has settled through the colander into the bottom of the 3-in-1 and putting it back up into top. As I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of the small BIAC is that it can be lifted out manually by one individual. Okay, so the wort is starting to run down in to the 3-in-1, and we're going to transfer wort out of the bottom and bring it back up into the top. And as mentioned, if you purchase the chugger pump assembly, then this is all done automatically with the pump. You don't need to transfer it manually. Okay, so as soon as we've started to vorlof, we're going to start raising the temperature inside the boil kettle because we're getting it ready for boil. So we're going to disconnect the power from the heating element from the ETC, and we're going to plug the heating element in directly into the wall. As soon as we can see the grain bed starting to surface or getting near the water dropping down, so it's close to the top of the grain bed, we're going to take the water that's in the jacket, the 3 liters that we've preheated, and we're going to be putting it into the back, into the top here, just to sparge the grains a little bit. Okay, so the wort is continuing to drip out of the mash colander. The grain is pretty much free of any wort. There's just the last little bit dripping in. We've got about 22 2 liters pre-boil volume. We're going to boil off just under 2 liters during the boil. This is going to be just about ready. Then we're going to take the mash colander, we're just going to put it into our compost and then start to clean up. Boil with the 1500 watt element. It's able to heat the water up at about 2 degrees Fahrenheit per minute when there's 5 gallons or 20 liters of water in the fermenter. So going from a mash out temp to the boil temp, it's going to take about 20 to 25 minutes in order to get a boil going, and then a few minutes longer to get the good rolling boil happening. Okay, so we've got the boil happening. 1500 watts, as I said, is a really good level for up to 5 gallons. We get a good rolling boil. You see the hot break coming through here, and we might have to unplug it once. However, it seems to be stabilizing, and with 22 liters pre-boil inside here, we're not coming over. Fermentation will also be fine because we'll have even more head space. Measured the gravity, just the pre-boil gravity, and we had about 1048, which gives us a mash efficiency of about 80%, so we're quite happy with that. We're just going to move the fermenter over here by the stove. We'll put it near, turn the fans on for the stove here, and move any of the humidity out of the house and put it outside. Okay, so the hot break has subsided. We got some good protein coagulation happening in there. That'll really help to settle out the protein. And we're going to add our hops. We've got 1.25 ounces of Willamette hops. I think they're about 7% acid. And so we're going to put them into the boil using the hop baskets here. So the boil has completed. We've just unplugged it and turned off the fan. We're down to about 21 liters, about 20.5 liters post-boil. And we're going to be programming the ETC controller and hooking up the cold water into the jacket to chill it down quite quickly. Before we do that, we're going to put the lid on. What I like to do is to just spray the lid with Start Sand after cleaning it really well. Because the lid is not part of the boil, then it isn't heat and sanitized like everything else. So just run it through here too. Make sure that everything is sanitized. It was perfectly clean before we sanitized it. It's a no-rinse sanitizer, so you could put this lid on directly. What I like to do is take boiled water and just rinse off the Star Sand. I think it might not be contributing anything bad to the flavor, but it's certainly not adding anything of a benefit to the flavor too, so I like to keep as much out as possible and just take some boiled water to rinse it off. Okay, with that done, we're going to put the lid back on, just leave the valve open. I'm not going to seal it quite yet. Here's an adapter that was picked up at a hardware store. It's just a fitting that'll fit into most household taps. Well, different taps or faucets are different, so it's best just to bring it into the hardware store with you, but you can get an adapter and get a garden hose fitting on the other end. So I take the TCV garden hose and tie it on to here. I'm going to take another hose off the exit side and just put it back into the sink. And I've programmed the ETC to have a chill temperature slightly higher than I want to ferment at. In this case, I'm going to be fermenting at about 68. And I want to then stop the chilling at about 72 because the jacket holds some residual chilling, and I'm just going to let it sit for about 10 minutes. That's going to let the protein settle out. It's going to equilibrate the temperature inside the fermenter to make sure that I'm pitching at exactly the target temperature. I have collapsed my smack pack a little while ago. and it's starting to swell out as the yeast is starting to get active inside. So I'm going to turn the chiller on, and it's going to take about 25 to 30 minutes to chill down. Okay, so I took the hose from the chugger pump assembly. It's the hose that brings the wort back up to the top of the colander, and I'm just repurposing it here to take the cold water out of the jacket and put it back into the sink. You don't want to put any kind of valve on the downstream side of the jacket, or you can cause pressure buildup inside the jacket, and that can deform the jacket. It's only meant for about 8 psi, so make sure you don't put any valve on the outside of the jacket. Okay, so cold water is starting to go through the jacket now, and it's carrying heat out of the wort and chilling the wort down, and then putting hot water down the drain. And that's it. Pretty simple and straightforward. It's been an enjoyable and easy brew day. The only thing to clean up has been the colander, which was real easy to put into the grist into the compost, and to rinse the colander out. And so all that remains now is to pull what has settled down to the bottom of the fermenter, the protein. We're going to pull it off just by putting a cup underneath the bottom port. We put a bit of Irish moss in the last 10 minutes of boil, so that's going to help with the clarifying as well. So let's just get a cup and put it under the bottom. And you can see that there's lots of protein. It's quite thick and porridgey. So we're just going to pour it out until it starts to run clear. So that's what we pulled out of the bottom of the fermenter. Okay, so the jacket has chilled the wort in about 25 minutes it took to chill it down to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. We drained the protein off of the bottom of the fermenter through the bottom port. Now we're just going to rock it back and forth to oxygenate the wort. So it can be done just by rocking it back and forth like this. Or you can get an oxygen cylinder and pump oxygen into one of the bottom ports, just bubble it up through it. We're going to open the top up and pour the yeast into the top of the vessel. We were careful to sanitize the bag before we opened it, and all the fittings have been sanitized too. So all that remains is we're going to attach a blow-off tube to the top of this port, and we're going to open the port. The gas is going to come out. So here we have our blow-off tube. And we left just a short section, a 1/2-inch hose. And we're going to attach it to the valve. And tie it on like that and open up the valve. Now any gas that is produced by CO2 is going to escape, and the water forms a water trap. You can also add a little bit of Star San or disinfectant. It's best to use the no rinse kind, and in case a vacuum does form and sucks it back into the valve, you don't want to be drinking bleach. So that's it. We're going to regulate the temperature of the ferment by using the electronic temperature controller, the ETC, and the TCV valve with water going through, and it's going to precisely regulate the temperature of fermentation so that the yeast have a consistent environment in order to do their thing. So, thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us using the form on the website, and thank you very much for watching.